What do the Bible stories of David, Moses, and the prophets teach us about the relationship that God wants with humanity? In the Exodus story, we see how the Bible shows God's values and priorities for humanity. For the Jewish people, and then for Christians later, what God does in Egypt at this time really defines who they are as a people and what their relationship with God looks like. One important thing to understand about this story is what it meant for the Israelites to be slaves in the ancient world. Today, we do understand slavery as a terrible way to live, and we also acknowledge that it's a great evil to do to another human being. But in the world of the ancient Egyptians, nobody thought that way. Nobody could even imagine a world where slavery would not be perfectly normal and totally accepted. Ancient nations would go to war against one another, and then anyone on the losing side who wasn't already dead would become a slave. This was almost always the case for thousands of years, both before and after the story of Exodus. So today, while if anyone actually enslaved another human being, which does in fact happen, they'd have this expectation that other people would judge them, that what they were doing was wrong, that they would be punished if they got caught. And there was none of that expectation in Egypt when they enslaved the Israelites. What's more, since the lives of slaves were in a sense spared during war, the idea of killing one was totally normal. Now, you wouldn't just kill a hard-working and obedient slave, just as you wouldn't set fire to your own house, but you would answer to no one if you just decided that slave wasn't worth having around. In fact, the king of Egypt does exactly this. He says, you know what? I got too many of these things lying around. I'll just chuck some in the river. He talks about people the way that I talk about cleaning clutter out of my garage. The important point is that at the beginning of the book of Exodus, although God has promised that the descendants of Abraham will become a great nation, they are in fact absolute nobodies. No one in the world sees the imprisonment, torture, forced labor, starvation, and murder of these people as anything wrong. It's just the way the world works. So this is the people that God finds and listens to. What the story shows us about the relationship between God and humanity is that before God comes on the scene, the people have absolutely nothing. They have no property. In fact, they're considered to be property. They have no rest and comfort. They're beaten and worked mercilessly. They have no one on their side. Everyone, and maybe even themselves, see them as trash. And they can't decide anything for themselves. They're absolutely powerless. But God comes and calls them my people, and he cares deeply enough about their suffering to take some pretty dramatic action on their part. So, this story shows us a few things about the relationship between God and humanity. 1. Without God, his people have nothing. We are all totally dependent on God. 2. God is completely uninterested in the power and the riches of the king. In fact, he's totally interested in the people who have no money, no power, and no status. Is there something else that you can see in the Exodus story that talks about how God relates with humanity?